Let's get this started. Today we will have a five chapter episode of this show. Wow. Years. Crime and Punishment. Phoenix. Fallout. And exercise and mindfulness to wrap up. And getting attacked by my demons, so we're going to try to fight them away with some good old-fashioned exercise. And yeah, music, I keep practicing piano. Okay, but without further ado, let's jump right in. Let's see. Fast forward to chapter 2. Okay, doke. I'm recording different places, and my laptop has shaky Wi-Fi, and number to ever have a backup, just in case. And in worst case scenario, both will fail. Gonna try anyway. Okay. All right, chapter 2. Here we go. Time flashes back to Ursula's great-great-grandmother. This is what we read yesterday from the book. Who burned herself badly when pirates for Francis Drake attached Riohacha. Her husband, unable to find an effective treatment for her terror and burn, builds her a bedroom without windows so she will no longer fear the intrusion of the pirate and his dogs. The husband, and this is directly from Lead Charts, the summary. The husband goes into business with a native tobacco planter named Don Jose Buendia, so their families have been tied ever since. Ursula and memories are useful for me for a couple different reasons. It helps me to make sense of what's already been read, but it also helps me to remember because my brain's like a sponge right now. I'm getting like flooded with so much information that it's sometimes hard to remember details. The husband goes into business with a native tobacco planter named Don Jose Buendia, and so their families have been tied ever since. Ursula and Jose Arquedill Buendia are first cousins. Hold on a second. That should be better. And first cousins, I assume that means their mother or father has a brother or sister that had a kid, and that child is the relationship. Yeah, I'm not super duper savvy when it comes to like first cousins, second cousins, third cousins. Like when I just think first cousin, I think my aunt or uncle, son or daughter. Yeah, sometimes family ties can get confusing as heck. Their families try to discourage the union because of the threat of the defects caused by inbreeding. Warned about an aunt and uncle with the tail of a pig. I remember reading that yesterday. Jose Arquedill Buendia makes light of the warning, and the couple is married, but Ursula removes. Ursula's mother makes her a chastity belt, which she wears to bed for several months. Rumors spread that a year after their marriage, Ursula is still a virgin because Jose Arquedill Buendia is impotent. They go on like this for another 6 months, and Jose Arquedill Buendia wins a cockfight against Prudencio Aguilar, and Aguilar insults Jose Arquedill Buendia's manhood publicly. Jose Arquedill Buendia then kills Aguilar with his grandfather's spear, which we also remember from yesterday. That night, Jose Arquedill Buendia orders his wife to have sex with him, blaming the murder on her. Ursula and Jose Arquedill Buendia are haunted by the ghost of Aguilar, that they will vacate the town to leave him in peace. The couple gathers a group of friends to set out across the mountains in search of new land. 14 months into the journey, Ursula gives birth to a son without any deformations. After 2 years of wandering, they find themselves on the other side of the mountains, looking at the swamps spread out before them. They camp beside a river, and that night, Jose Buendia dreams of a city of mirrors named Macondo. In the morning, he declares that they will establish the city right then and there. He doesn't decipher his dream until the day he sees the ice and believes Macondo will eventually be built of ice. He dreams of an ice factory, but focuses on the education of his sons, moving back into the present. Aureliano Buendia has an intuition for the art of alchemy. Yeah, already there are a lot of Buendias in this book, and it's already getting kind of confusing, somewhat like War and Peace, where there's so many family members and individuals keep track of. It's like Ursula's easy enough to remember because she's not like, it's not Von Ursula, Don Ursula, John Ursula, like 5 different Ursulas, only one Ursula, so that helps. Jose Arquedill Buendia set out to separate Ursula's gold from the bottom of the pot. Jose Arquedill takes little interest. This is Jose Arquedill the First. Takes little interest, maturing into a very strong young man who notices has a notably large penis. Again, like a bunch of kids is a surefire way to get confused. Like I already don't know like half these characters who they are. A woman arrives to the house to help wars, and she can also tell people's stories using her deck of cards. She reads Jose Arquedill's cards and messes with her and her smoky smell. She invites him to visit her in the night, and he goes to her house, trying to find her in the dark rooms by her smell. In a house full of people, she takes him to a corner and makes love to him, although Jose Arquedill feels, even in that moment, fearful solitude. The woman who chose Arquedill the First, his name is Pilar Turner. Yeah, one of the original inhabitants of Macondo, dragged along by her parents to separate her from a man who'd raped her at 14 and broke his to kill her. Another surefire way to confuse me as the reader is by having multiple characters of the same person. Like Jose Arquedill the First, Jose Arquedill the Second, Jose Arquedill the Third. Like, he just please use originality and creativity when you're coming up with your kids' names. Don't even think about naming your kid after yourself, please. Just showing everyone how vain and egotistical you are when you do so, in my opinion. Jose Arquedill dreams of her in the daytimes and visits her at night. Aureliano Buendia and Jose Arquedill Buendia announce that they have separated Ursula's gold. Jose Arquedill tells Aureliano about his affair with Ternera, and the two brothers talk all night with one another until Aureliano asks what an orgasm feels like, and Jose Arquedill, it's like an earthquake. Not quite. I would say not quite, but okay. I would more liken it to something like biting into like a like your favorite dessert, maybe like ice cream or something like that. Yeah, hard I'd say that's maybe the best estimation I could give. Like your favorite food, eating your favorite food. Jose Arquedill hides from his news being withdrawn. Oh, oops, sorry, skipped ahead. He's returned with the flying carpet. Jose Arquedill the first implement. She tells him he's going to be a father. Jose Arquedill news becoming withdrawn. During the fair alone one night, he spots a girl who is the beautiful person he's ever seen. To a tent where many of the gypsies are passing through. Though he is first, the passion of the others awakes his own interest. Several days later, he leaves with Gypsy Band. Ursula tries to find Jose first, but ends up wandering very far away. Jose Arquedill goes out in search of his wife, but after 3 days of searching, returns empty. So that's not going to be confusing at all. He cares for baby Amaranta and Pilar Ternera, offers to do the chores, but Aureliana Buendia can tell via his psychic powers that she's to blame for Jose's disappearance, so he sends her away. Magical things begin to happen in the laboratory. Objects moving on their own and water boiling without a heat source. 5 months after leaving, Ursula arrives home with a pack of people following her, having discovered that the closest civilization was 2 days away on the other side of the swamp. Okay, so we find ourselves in chapter 3. Oh man, and where do we have like a jam-packed family? Like it definitely reminds me a lot of War and Peace that way. Like what's better than more people? Woohoo! Okay, anyway. Here we are, chapter 3. Lord Ternera's son was brought to his grandparents' house 2 weeks after he was born. So she is a son daughter now. So I thought her daughter was Amaranta. Unless that's her son's name. Is that the case? No, sorry, taken. Amaranta is the biological daughter of Jose, Buendia, and Ursula. So Pilar and Aureliano. Well, Arquedill and Pilar have a son. Ursula admitted him grudgingly, conquered once more by the obstinacy of her husband. Yeah, a chart would definitely be helpful. Like, what the heck? Like, okay, so Ursula's to Jose Arquedill Buendia, and then Pilar Ternera is with Jose Arquedill the first. Yeah, again, a little somewhat confusing because we have multiple characters with this. Ursula grudgingly conquered once more by the obstinacy of her husband, who could not tolerate the idea that an offshoot of his blood should be. He imposed a condition that the child should never know. Hallelujah. Some rigid, please. Like, not he called Jose, okay? Like, there are other names. Other Spanish names. Marco, right? A couple others. Gabriel, maybe. Miguel. Like, there are all kinds of names. Like, just pick one that's not Jose. At that time, there was in the town, much bustle. Let's see, where am I? There's so much activity in town and so much bustle in the house that The care of the children was relegated to a secondary level of visitation. Guajaro, the brother in flight, from a plague of insomnia and scourging for several years. They were both so to help her with her household chores. That was how when Amaranta came to speak the Guajiro language before Spanish. Drink lizard broth and eat spider eggs without Ursula promising business and candy animals. The condo had finished. People who had come with Ursula spread the news of the quality of its soil and its privilege and with respect to the swamp, so that from the changed into an active town with stores and workshops and a permanent commercial route over which the first Arabs arrived with their baggy pants and ring in their ears, swapping glass beads for macaws. And I guess that's the third generation at a time. I believe there are 3 generations. There's Jose Arquedill Bonilla, Jose Arquedill, the son. Jose is essentially the fascinated by an immediate reality that came to be more fantastic than the vast universe of his imagination, lost in the alchemist's laboratory. Put to rest the material that had become attenuated with months of manipulation. Went back to being an enterprising man of early and decided upon the layout of the streets and the location of the new house so that no one would use that everyone did not have. Well, they were advanced in at least one way. That's good. He acquired such authority that foundations were not laid or walls built without his being consulted. It was decided that he should be the one in charge of the distribution of land. Turn with their long carnival transformed now into a gigantic organization of games of luck and chance. They were received with great joy, for it was thought that Jose Arquedill would be coming back with them. But Jose Arquedill did not come with a snake man, who, according to what Ursula thought, was the only one who could tell her son, so the gypsies were not allowed to camp in town or split in it in the future, for they were considered the bearers of concupiscence and perversion. I read a word that I don't already know. Concupiscence is an example of that. Concupiscence, meaning lust. Okay. I don't know why I just say lust, but okay. Jose Arquedill Buendia, however, was explicit in maintaining that the old tribe of Melkids who had contributed so much to the growth of the village with his age-old wisdom and his fabulous always find the gates open. But Melkiad's tribe, according to what the wanderer had been wiped off the earth, gone beyond human knowledge. One bit of license, the freeing of the birds, which, since the time of the founding, had many time merry with their flutes, and installing placed musical clocks in every house. Carved wood, which Arabs had traded for macaws, and which Jose that every half hour down grew merry with the progressive chord. The climax of a noontime that was as exact and unanimous as a complete waltz. It was also Jose Arquedill Buendia who decided during those years that they should plant among trees instead of acacias. They should plant almond trees instead of acacias on the streets, and who discovered without ever revealing it was forever. Many years later, when Mikado was a field of wooden houses, the dusty almond trees still stood on the oldest streets, although no one knew who had planted them. While his father was putting the town in order, and his mother was candied little roosters and fish. She left the house twice a day, strung along sticks of balsa wood. Liliano or in the abandoned library, learning the art of silver work by his own experimentation. If I'm not mistaken, Aureliano, the second son of Jose Arquedill Buendia. If I'm not mistaken on that, and Ursula. He shot up so fast, the clothing left behind by his brother no longer fit him, and he began to wear his father's. Vizon had pleats in the shirt and darts in the pants, because Aureliano had not acquired the corpulence of others. Adolescence had taken away the softness of his voice, and him silent and definitely solitary. But on the other hand, it had restored the expression that he had in his eyes when he was born. He concentrated so much on his experiments and so that he scarcely left the laboratory to eat. Worried over his inner withdrawal, Jose Arquedill Buendia gave him the house and a little money, thinking that perhaps he needed a woman. He spent the money on muriatic acid to prepare some aqua regia, and he beautified the keys by plating them with gold. His successes were hardly comparable to those of Arquedill and Amaranta, who had already begun to get their second teeth and still went about all day clutching at the Indians' cloaks, in their decision not to speak Spanish but the Guajiro language. You shouldn't complain, Ursula told her husband. Children inherit parents' madness. True. And I should say also applies to grandparents as well. As she was lamenting her marriage, convinced that the wild behavior of her children was tale, Reliano gave her a look that wrapped her in an atmosphere of uncertainty. Is Arquedill? Is Arquedill our real mother? Second look at this chart. Arquedill, where are you? Okay. Yeah, so Jose, Arquedill, and Ursula. Aureliano Buendia, Jose Arquedill, and Anita. And Aureliano and good gosh. Somebody, Ursula, as she did whenever he made a prediction, tried to break it down with her housewifey logic. It was normal for someone to be coming. It just came through Macondo every day without arousing secret ideas. Nevertheless, not all logic, Aureliano was sure of his prediction. Aureliano's the son of I don't know who it will be, he insisted. Is already on the way. That Sunday, in fact, Rebecca arrived. She was only 11 years old. She had made the difficult trip from Manaar with some dealers who had taken on the task of delivering her along with a letter to Jose Arquedill Buendia. They could not explain precisely who the person was who asked the favor. Her entire bed consisted of a small trunk, a little rocking chair with small hand flowers, and a canvas sack which kept making a clock, clock, clock sound, where she carried her parents' bones. The letter addressed to Jose Arquedill Buendia was written in very terms by someone who loved him very much in spite of time and distance. He felt obliged by a basic humanitarian feeling to do the charitable thing and send him a poor, unsheltered orphan who was a second cousin of Ursula's and consequently also a relative of Jose Arquedill Buendia, although farther removed because she was the daughter of that friend Nicanor Ulloa and his very worthy wife Rebecca Montiel. May God keep them in his holy kingdom, whose remains the girl was carrying so that they might be given burial. The names mentioned as well as in the letter were perfectly legible, but neither with those names, nor did they know anyone by the name of this letter, much less the remote village of Manaar. It was impossible to obtain any further information from the girl. From the moment she arrived, she had been in the rocker, sucking her from everyone with her startled eyes without kind of understanding what they were asking her. She wore a diagonally strap that had been black, worn by use, and a pair of scaly patent leather boots. Her hair was held for ears with bows of black ribbon. Her scapular with the images worn away by sweat. Her right wrist, the faint carnivorous animal mounted on a backing of copper as an amulet against the evil eye. Her greenish skin, her stomach, round and tense as arm, revealed poor health and hunger that were older than she was, but when they kept a plate on her without tasting anything. They even began to think that she was a deaf mute until the Indians in their language if she wanted some water, and she recognized them and said, "Yeah, her head." They kept her because there was nothing else they could do. They decided which court letter was her mother's name. As Reliano had the patience to read her the names of all the saints, and he didn't from anyone. There was no semi-condo at that time, for no one had died up till then. They kept the bag of bones to wait for the worthy place of burial. For a long time it got in the way everywhere and would be found where least expected, always with the ducking of a brood. Long time passed before Rebecca incorporated into the. She would sit in her small rocker, sucking her finger in the most remote corner of the house. It attracted her attention except the music of the clocks. She would look for it every half hour with her frightened eyes as if hoped to find some place in the air. It could not get her to eat for several days. No one understood why she had not died of hunger until the Indians, who were everything, for they went ceaselessly about the house in their stealthy feet, discovered that Rebecca the damp earth of the courtyard. The cake of whitewash thatched the walls with her nails, and with a sense of trying to put away supplies that she could eat when no one was looking. From then on, they put her under an implacable watch. Might be implacable, yeah, I think it's implacable watch. They threw cowgall into the courtyard and rubbed hot chili in the walls, thinking they could defeat her pernicious vice with those bits. But she showed such signs of astuteness and ingenuity to find earth that her forced to use more drastic methods. She put some orange juice and rhubarb into the pan that she and the dew, although no one had proved was the specific remedy. She thought that any bitter substance in the stomach would have made the liver react. Rebecca was so rebellious and strong of her frailness that they had to tie her up like a calf to make her swallow the medicine. They could barely keep back, fix or bear up the strange hieroglyphics that she alternated with her bites and spitting. According to what the scandalized Indians said, were the vilest obscenities that one could imagine. When Ursula discovered that, she added whipping to the treatment. It was never established whether it was rhubarb or the beatings that had an effect, or both of them together. The truth was that 2 weeks Rebecca began recovery. She took part in the games of Arquedill and Amaranth, Spanish with as much fluency as the Indian language, that she had a remarkable time at work, and that she could sing the clocks with some very funny words that she herself had invented. It did not take long for them to consider her another member of the family. She was more affectionate to Ursula than any of her own children had been. She called Arquedill and Amaranth brother and sister, really uncle. Was it Arquedill, Buendia, grandma? Aureliano and Arquedill were brothers. Unless he's talking about the second Arquedill. Yeah, I think so. Aureliano and Arquedill. Both of Jose and Buendia's sons named their sons after themselves. Yeah. Their sons after themselves. So Aureliano named his son Aureliano Jose. Yes, and to give you an idea of how conceited Aureliano was, he also had another son called Aurelianos. What a jerk. And then there's Jose Arquedill, whose son is Arquedill. Yeah, so the second generation are brothers, and then the third generation are cousins. What is wrong with this family? Like, what the heck? Now, where was I? It was soon revealed that she spoke Spanish with as much fluency as the Indian language, that she had a remarkable ability for manual work, that she could sing the waltz of the clocks with some very funny words that she herself had invented. It didn't take long to consider her another member of the family. She was more affectionate to Ursula than any of her own children had been. She called Arquedill and Amaranta brother and sister, Aureliano uncle, and Jose Arquedill Buendia grandpa. And this is Rebecca, so that she finally deserved as much as the other, Rebecca Buendia, the only one that she ever had, and that she believed until her death. One night about the time that Rebecca was cured of the vice of eating earth, brought to sleep in the other children's room, the Indian woman who saw a strange intermittent sound in the corner. She got up in alarm, thinking that an animal had come into the room. She saw Rebecca sucking her finger and like those of a cat. Terrified, exhausted by her fate, Visitone recognized in those eyes the symptoms of the sickness whose threat had obliged her and her brother to exile themselves forever. Age-old kingdom had been prince and princess. It was an insomnia plague. Qatar, the Indian, was gone from the house by morning, because her fatalistic heart told her that the least would follow her, no matter what, to the farthest corner of the earth. No one understood Visitacion's. You don't ever sleep again, so much the better, Jose Arquedill said in good humor. One part of the sick insomnia was not the impossibility of sleep, for the body did toward a moral manifestation, a loss of memory. She meant that when the sick person began to his state of vigil, the record of his childhood began to be erased from his memory. Then the name and notion of things, the identity of people, and even the awareness of his own being, till he that had no past. Not all bad. Some elements of the past are best. As Nietzsche once said, blessed are the forgetful, for they get the better even of their blunders. Okay. Jose Arquedill Buendia, dying with laughter, thought that it was just a question of one of the many uses invented by the Indian superstitions of isolating her from the other children. For several weeks, when Visitacion's terror seemed to have died down, Arquedill Buendia found himself over in bed to fall asleep. Ursula, who had also awakened long, answered, "I'm thinking about Prudencio Aguilar again." They did not sleep a minute, but the following day they felt so rested that they thought about the bad night. Aureliano commented with surprise at lunchtime that he felt very well in spite of the fact that he had spent the whole night in laboratory gilding a brew he planned to give to Ursula for her birthday. He did not become alarmed until the third bedtime. They realized that they had gone more than 50 hours without sleeping. "Or wait, too," the Indian said with her fatalistic conviction. "Once it gets into a house, no one can escape it." They had indeed contracted the illness of insomnia. Ursula, who had learned from mother the medicine value plants, prepared and made them all drink it. They could not go to sleep and spent the whole day dreaming on their feet. In that state of hallucinated lucidity, not only did they see images of their own dreams, some saw the images dreamed by others. It was as if the house was sitting in her rocker in a corner of the kitchen. Rebecca dreamed that a man looked like her, dressed in white linen with her collar closed by a gold button, put it in the child's hair. Ursula understood the man and woman were. She made a great effort to recognize them. She confirmed her. She had never. The candy animals made in house still being sold in the town. Children and adults sucked with the last little green roosters of insomnia, the exquisite pink fish of insomnia, and the tender yellow ponies of insomnia, so that dawn on Monday found the whole town awake. No one was alarmed at first. On the contrary, they were happy at not sleeping because there was so much to do in Macondo in those days, barely enough time. Or that soon they had nothing else to be found at 3 o'clock in the night with their arms crossed, counting the notes in the waltz of the clock. Insomnia definitely is like a blood curse. It's the only time I worry about anything. To talk to people or worry about when I'm asleep. Dawn, so it's a give and take. who wanted to sleep, not because of the nostalgia for dreaming, tried all kinds of methods of exhausting themselves. They would gather together to converse endlessly, to tell over and over for hours on end, to complicate to limits of exasperation about the Capone. It was an endless game in which they wanted him to tell them the story of Capone. When they answered yes, they wanted him to tell them the story about the They remained silent. The narrator told them that he had not asked them to remain, but whether they wanted him to tell them the story about the Capone. No one could leave, because the narrator would say that he had not asked them to leave, but wanted him to tell the Capone. So on and so on in a vicious circle that lasted entire nights. 99 bottles of beer on the wall, 99 bottles of beer. Take one down and pass it around. 99 bottles of beer on the wall. But yeah, that is. When Arquedill realized that the plague had invaded the town, he gathered together the heads of families to explain to them he knew about the sickness of insomnia. They agreed on methods to prevent the scourge from spreading to other towns in the swamp. That was why they took the bells off the goats, bells that the Arabs had swapped them for macaws, put them to town at the disposal of those who would not listen to the advice and entreaties of the sentinels and insisted on visiting them. All strangers who passed through the streets of Macondo at that time had to ring bells, so that the sick people would know that they were healthy. They were not allowed to eat or drink anything during their stay, for there was no doubt but that illness was transmitted by mouth. All food and drink had been contaminated by insomnia. In that way, they kept the plague restricted to the perimeter of the town. Effective was the quarantine that the day came when the emergency situation was accepted as a natural thing. Life was organized in such a way that work picked up its rhythm again, and no one worried anymore about the useless habit of sleeping. It was Reliano who conceived the formula that was to protect them against loss of memory for several months. He discovered it by chance. An expert insomniac, having one of the first, he had learned the art of silver work to perfection. One day he was looking for the small anvil that he used for laminating metals, and he could not remember its name. He told him steak. Reliano wrote the name on a piece of paper that he pasted to the base of the small anvil, steak. And that way he was sure of not forgetting in the future. It did not occur to him that this was the first manifestation of a loss of memory, because the object had a difficult name to remember. A few days later, he discovered he had trouble remembering almost every object in the laboratory. Then he marked them with their respective names so that all he had to do was read the inscription to identify them. When his father told him about his alarm at having forgotten even the most impressive happenings in his childhood, Aureliano explained his method to him, and Jose Arquedill put it into practice, all through the house, and later on imposed it in the whole village. With an ink brush, he marked everything with its name: table, chair, clock, door, wall, bed, pan. With crayon, marked the animals and plants: cow, goat, pig, hen, cassava, caladium, banana. Little by little, studying the infinite possibilities of a loss of memory, he realized that the day might things would be recognized inscriptions, but that no one would remember their use. Exactly. Like, what are you going to do when you can't remember how to read? Or your knowledge of your language breaks down. You no longer have the use of vocabulary. Like, it's actually pretty fascinating. Like, some people suffer like brain injuries and they have to like relearn everything, like literally how to talk, how to tie their shoes. I think people recovering from certain types of brain injuries have that happen. They literally forget everything. All right, let's see. Then he was more explicit. The sign that he hung on the neck of the cow was an exemplary proof of the way in which the inhabitants of Macondo were prepared to fight against loss of memory. The cow, she must be milked every morning so that she will produce milk, and the milk must be boiled in order to be mixed with coffee with milk, coffee and milk. Thus they went on living in a reality that was slipping away, momentarily captured by words, but which would escape irremediably when they forgot the values of the written letters. At the beginning of the road into the swamp, they put up a sign that said Macondo, another larger one on the main street that said God exists. In all houses, keys to memorizing objects and feelings had been written. Man had so much vigilance and moral strength that many succumbed to the spell of an imaginary reality, one invented by themselves, which was less practical for them but more comforting. Pilar Ternera was the one who contributed most to popularize the mystification when she conceived the trick of reading the past cards as she had read the future before. By means of that recourse, the insomniacs began to live in a world with certain alternatives of it, where a father was remembered as the dark man who had arrived at the beginning of April, and a mother was remembered as a dark woman who wore a gold ring on her left hand. The birthday was reduced to the last on which a lark sang in the laurel tree. Defeated by those practices of consolation, Jose Arquedill Buendia then decided to build a memory that he had once in order to remember the marvelous inventions of the gypsies. The artifact was based on the possibility of reviewing every morning, from beginning to end, the totality of knowledge acquired during one's life. He conceived of it as a spinning dictionary that a person placed on the axe to operate by means of a lever, so that in very few hours there would pass before his eyes the notions most necessary for life. He'd succeeded in writing almost 14,000 entries when along the road from the swamp a strange-looking old man with the sad sleeper's bell appeared, carrying a bulging tied a cart covered with a black cloth. He went straight to the house of Jose Arquedill Buendia. Visitacion did not recognize him when she opened the door. Thought he had come with the idea of selling something, unaware that nothing could be sold in a town that was sinking irrevocably into the quicksand of forgetfulness. He was a decrepit man, although his voice was also broken by uncertainty, and his hands seemed to doubt the existence of things. It was evident that he came from the world where men could sleep and remember. Jose Arquedill Buendia found him sitting in the living room fanning himself with a patch black hat as he read with compassionate attention the signs pasted to the wall. He greeted him with a broad show of affection, afraid that he had known another time that he did not remember him now. Aware of his falseness, he felt himself forgotten, not with the irremediable forgetfulness of the heart, but with a different kind of forgetfulness, which was more cruel and irrevocable, which he knew very well, because it was the forgetfulness of death. Then he understood. He opened the suitcase crammed with indecipherable objects. He took out many flasks. He gave Jose Arquedill Buendia a drink of a gentle color, left on his memory. His eyes became moist from weeping, even before he himself in an absurd living room where objects were labeled, and before ashamed of the solemn nonsense written on the walls. He recognized the newcomer with a dazzling glow of joy. Alkiades. Kind of reminds me of types of kindergarten classroom, where it's things are being labeled. Students are acquiring language for the first, and they're building language skills, vocabulary skills. If you are forgetting things at a fast enough rate, technically that's helpful to you too. It's oh, okay, so this is a book. But yeah, as I've said, if the memory is prolific enough, then very understanding of language and how to read may break well. So even though it's not be useful because you'll forget how to read what it says on the card. Makana was the recovery of its memory. Jose Arquedill Buendia and Melquiades dusted off their old friendship. The gypsy was inclined to stay in the town. He really had been through death. He returned because he could not bear the solitude. I would say on that note, the dead far outnumbered the living. Repudiated by his tribe, having lost all of his supernatural faculties because of his faithfulness to life, he decided to take refuge in that corner of the world which had still not been discovered, dedicated to the operation of a daguerreotype laboratory. I believe are black photos, basically. Jose Arquedill had never heard of that invention. Yeah, it's the predecessor of photographs, daguerreotypes. When he saw himself and his whole family into a sheet of iridescent metal for an eternity, it was stupefaction. Created the oxidized daguerreotype in which Jose Arquedill Buendia appeared with his bristly and graying hair, his cardboard collar attached to his shirt by a copper button, and an expression of startled solemnity, whom Ursula described, dying with laughter, as a frightened general. Jose Arquedill Buendia, in fact, frightened on that clear December morning when the type was made, for he was thinking that people were slowly wearing away, while his image would endure on a metallic plaque. Through a curious reversal of custom, it was Ursula who got the idea out of it, as it was also she who forgot her ancient bitterness and decided that milk kids in the house. Although she had admitted them to make a daguerreotype of her because, according to her very words, she did not want to survive as a laughingstock for her grandchildren. As long as it's a good daguerreotype, as long as it's a good picture, it shouldn't matter, right? That morning, she dressed the children in their best clothes, powdered their faces, and gave a spoonful of beer to each one so they would all remain absolutely motionless during the nearly 2 minutes in front of Milkade's fantastic camera. Family daguerreotype, the only one that ever existed, Aureliano appeared in black velvet between Amarant and Rebecca. I'm not sure what he means here, but he didn't linger in the same clairvoyant look that he would have years later as he faced the firing squad. But he still had not sensed the premonition of his fate. He was an expert silversmith, praised all over the swampland for the delicacy of his work. In the workshop which he shared with Melkade's mad laboratory, he could barely be heard breathing. He seemed to be taking refuge in some other time, while his father and the gypsy with shouts interpreted the predictions of Nostradamus. Amidst a noise of flasks and trays and the disaster of spilled acids and silver bromide that was lost in the twists and turns it gave at every instant. That dedication to his work, the good judgment which he directed his attention, had allowed Aureliano to earn in a short time more money than Ursula had with her delicious candy fauna. But everyone thought it strange that he was now a full-grown man and had not known a woman. It was true that he never had one. Several months later saw the return of Francisco the Man, an ancient vagabond who is almost 200 years old and who passed through Macondo distributing songs that he composed himself. In them, Francisco the Man told in great detail the things that had happened in the towns along his route, from Manaur to the edge of the swamp, so that if anyone had a message to send, or an event to make public, he would pay him 2 cents to include it in his repertory. That was how Ursula learned of the death of her mother, as a simple consequence of listening to the songs in the hope that they would say something about her son, Jose Arquedill. Francisco the Man, called that because he had once defeated the devil in a duel of improvisation, and whose real name no one knew, disappeared from Macondo during the insomnia plague, and one night he reappeared suddenly in Caterino's store. The whole town went to listen to him to find out what had happened in the world. On that occasion there arrived with him a woman who was so fat that 4 Indians had to carry her in a rocking chair. Adolescent mulatto girl with a forlorn look who protected her son with an umbrella. Aureliano went to Caterino's store that night. He found Francisco the Man, like a monolithic chameleon, sitting in the midst of a circle of bystanders. He was singing the news with his old, out-of-tune voice, accompanying himself with the same archaic accordion that Sir Walter Raleigh had given him in the Guianas, keeping time with his great walking feet that were cracked from saltpeter. In front of a door at the rear through which men were going and coming, the matron of the rocking chair was sitting and fanning herself in silence. Caterino, with a felt rose behind his ear, was selling the gathering mugs of fermented cane juice, and he took advantage of the occasion to go over to the men and put his hand on them where he should not have. Toward midnight the heat was unbearable. Aureliano listened to the news to the end, without hearing anything was of interest to his family. He was getting ready to go home when the matron signaled him with her hand. "You going too," she told him. "It only cost 20 cents. Aureliano threw a coin into the hopper that the matron had in her lap and went into the room without knowing why. The adolescent mulatto girl with her small bitch's teats was naked on the bed. Before Aureliano, 63 men had passed through the room that night. From being used so much kneaded with sweat and sighs, the air in the room had begun to turn to mud. The girl took off the soaked sheet and asked Aureliano to hold it by one side. It was as heavy as a piece of canvas. They squeezed it, twisting it at the ends until it regained its natural weight. They turned over them, and the sweat came out of the other side. Aureliano was anxious for that operation never to end. He knew the theoretical mechanics of love, but he could not stay on his feet because of the weakness of his knees. Although he had goose pimples on his burning skin, he could not resist the urgent need to expel the weight of his bowels. When the girl finished fixing up the bed and told him to get undressed, he gave her a confused explanation. They made me come in. They told me to throw 20 cents into the hopper and hurry up. The girl understood his confusion. If you throw more when you go out, you can stay a little longer, she said softly. Aurelio got undressed, tormented by shame, unable to get rid of the idea that he could not stand comparison with that of his brother. In spite of the girl's efforts, he felt more and more indifferent and terribly alone. Another 20 cents, he said with a desolate voice. The girl thanked him in silence. Her back was raw. Her skin stuck to her ribs, and her breathing was worse because of an immeasurable exhaustion. 2 years before, far away from there, she had fallen asleep without putting out the candle and had awakened surrounded by flames. The house where she lived with the grandmother who had raised her was reduced to ashes. Since then, her grandmother carried her from town to town, putting her to bed for 20 cents, in order to make up the value of the burnt house. According to the girl's calculation, she still had 10 years of 70 men per night. Wow. Because she also had to pay the expenses of the trip and for both of them, as well as the pay of the Indians who carried the rocking chair. When the matron knocked on the door the second time, Leon left the room without having done anything. He tired to weep. That night, he could not sleep, thinking about the girl with a mixture of desire and pity. He felt an irresistible need to love her and protect her. At dawn, worn out by insomnia and fever, he made the call to marry her in order to free her from the despotism of her grandmother, to enjoy all the nights of satisfaction that she would give the 70 men. But at 10 o'clock in the morning, when he reached a store, the girl had left town. Time mitigated his mad proposal, but it aggravated his feelings of frustration. He took refuge in work. He resigned himself to being a useless man for all his life in order to hide the shame of his usefulness. In the meantime, Melquiades had printed on his plane that was printable in Macondo. He felt the daguerreotype laboratory to the fantasies of Jose Arquedill Buendia, who resolved to use it to obtain scientific proof of the existence of God. Good luck. What are you going to do? Take pictures of this. And go, see? Our world is, therefore God exists. Something made this world, and that something is God. Okay. Though a complicated process of superimposed exposures taken in different files, he was sure that sooner or later he would get a daguerreotype of God, if he existed, or put an end once and for all to the supposition of his existence. Melquiades got deeper into his interpretations of Nostradamus. He would stay up until very late, defecating in his faded velvet vest, scribbling with his spare hands, whose rings had lost the glow of former times. One night he thought he had found a prediction of the future of Macondo. It was to be a luminous city with great glass houses, where there was no remaining of the race of the Buendia. Ursula fought to preserve confidence in that extravagant house, having a business of little candy animals with an oven that went all night turning out baskets, and more bread with a prodigious variety of puddings, meringues, and cookies, which disappeared in a few hours on the roads winding through the swamp. She had reached an age where she had a right to rest, but she was nonetheless more and more active. So busy was she in her prosperous enterprises that one afternoon she looked actively toward the courtyard, while the Indian woman helped her sweet and go, and she saw two unknown and beautiful girls doing frame embroidery in the light of the They were Rebecca and Maranta. As soon as they had taken off the mourning clothes for their grandmother, which they wore with inflexible rigor for 3 years, their bright clothes seemed to have given them a new place in the world. Rebecca, contrary to what might have been expected, was the more beautiful. She had a light complexion, large and peaceful eyes, and magical hands that seemed to work out the design of the embroidery with invisible threads. Amaranta the younger was somewhat graceless, but she had the natural distinction and innocence of her dead grandmother. Next to them, although he was already revealing the physical drive of his father, Arquedill looked like a child. He set about learning with Aureliano, also taught him how to read and write. Ursula suddenly realized that the house had become full of people, that her children were on the point of marrying and having children. They would be obliged to scatter for lack of space. Then she took out the money she had accumulated over long years of hard labor, arrangements with her customers, and undertook the enlargement of the house. She had a formal parlor for visits built. Another one was more comfortable and cool for daily use. Dining room with a table with 12 plates where the family would sit with all of their guests. 9 bedrooms with windows on the courtyard, and a lawn protected from the heat of noon by a rose garden, with which to place pots of ferns. Kitchen and lawn 2 ovens. The granary where Pilar Ternera had built so that there would never be a lack of food in the house. She had baths built in the courtyard and the shade chestnut tree. A woman there for the men. And then a large stable, fenced-in chicken yard. A shed for the milk cows, and an aviary open to the 4 wandering birds there at their pleasure. Followed by dozens of masons and carpenters, as if she contracted her husband's hallucinating fever, Ursula fixed the position of low heat and distributed space without the least sense of its limitations. The building of the founders became workmen exhausted by sweat, who asked everybody please not to molest them, exasperated by the sack of bones that followed them everywhere with its dull rattle. In that discomfort, breathing quicklime and tar, no one could see very well how from the bowels of the earth there was rising not only the largest house in town, but the most hospitable and cool house that had ever existed in the region of the swamp. Jose Arquedill Buendia, trying to survive divine providence in the midst of the cataclysm, was one who least understood it. The new house was almost finished when Ursula drew him out of his chimerical world in order to inform him that she had an order to paint the front blue, not white as they had wanted. She showed him the official document. Jose Arquedill Buendia, without understanding what his wife was about, deciphered the signature. "Who is this fellow?" he asked. "The magistrate," Ursula answered disconsolately. "They say authority sent by the government." Don Apolinar Mascote, the magistrate, had arrived in Macondo very quietly. He put up at the Jacob, built by one of the fur Arabs who came to swap nicks for macaws. On the following day, he rented his money at the door on the street 2 blocks away from the Buendia house. He set up a table and a chair that he bought from Jacob, nailed up on the wall a shield of the Republic that he had brought with him. On the door, he painted the sign "Magistrate." His first order was for all houses to be painted blue in celebration of the anniversary of national independence. Jose Arquedill Buendia, with a copy of the order in his hand, found him taking his nap in a hammock he had set up in the narrow office. "Did you write this paper?" On our Mascote, mature man, timid with a ruddy complaint, said yes. "By what right?" Jose Arquedill Buendia asked again. Don Apolinar Mascote from the drawer of the table and showed it to him. "I've been named magistrate in this town." Jose Arquedill Buendia did not even look at the. "In this town we do not give orders with pieces of paper," he said without losing his calm. "So that you know it once and for all. We don't need any judges. It needs judging." Facing Don Apure without raising his voice, he gave a detailed account of how they had the village, of how they distributed the land, opened the roads, and introduced the improvements that necessitated without having bothered the government, without anyone having bothered them. "We're so peaceful that none of us has died, even of a natural death. You can see that we still don't have any cemetery. No one was upset that the government had not helped them. On the contrary, they were happy that up until then it had let them grow in peace. He hoped that it would continue leaving them that way, because the first upstart who came along would tell them what to do." Don Apollon had put on his denim jacket, white like his trousers, without losing at any moment the elegance of his gestures. "Welcome." Jose Arquedill Buendia concluded. "Paint their houses blue. You can." He took a step back in his jaws as he said with a certain affliction, "I must warn you that I'm armed." Jose Arquedill Buendia did not know exactly when his hands regained their strength. He used to pull down horses. He grabbed on Apolinar Mascote by the lapels and lifted him to the level of his eyes. "I'm doing this," he said, "because I'd rather carry you around alive than have to keep carrying you around dead for the rest of my life." In that way, he carried him through the middle of the street, spent by the lapels until he put him down on his 2 feet on the swamp road. A week later, he was back with 6 barefoot and ragged soldiers armed with an ox cart in which his wife and daughters were traveling. 2 other carts arrived later with the furniture and household utensils. In the Hotel Jacob, while he looked at the house, under the protection of the soldiers. The founders of Kondo, resolving to expel the invaders, went with their sons to put themselves at the disposal of Buendia. But he was against it, as he explained, because it was not manly to make trouble for someone in front of his family. Don Apollonar had returned with his wife and daughters, so he decided to resolve the situation in a pleasant way. Aureliano went with him. About that time, he cultivated the black mustache with fixed tips, somewhat stentorian voice that would characterize him in the war. Unarmed, without paying any attention to the guards, they went into the magistrate's office. Don Apollonar Moscote did not lose his calm. He introduced them to two of his daughters who appeared to be there. Pero, 16, dark like her mother, and Remedios, only 9, a pretty little girl with lily-colored skin. They were gracious and well-mannered. They came in before being introduced. They gave them chairs to sit on. But they both remained standing. Very well, my friend, Jose Arquedill. You may stay here not because there's bandits with shotguns at the door, but out of consideration for your wife and daughters. Don Apollonar Moscote was upset, but Jose Arquedill Buendia did not give him time to reply. Make 2 conditions, he went on. The first one can paint his house the color he feels like. The second, that the soldiers leave at once. We will guarantee order for you. The magistrate raised his right hand with all the fingers. The word of your enemy, Jose Arquedill Buendia said. He added in a bitter tone, because I must tell you a thing. You and enemies. The soldiers left after him. A few days later, Jose Straight's family. Everybody was at peace except Aureliano. The image of Remedios, the magistrate's younger daughter, because of her age, could have been his daughter, kept painting him in some part of his body. His station outward him when he walked, like a pebble in dew. The use of government. Decaying this perhaps utopian society. No one dies. But we'll see how that changes. And let's see, does Jose Arquedill Buendia have a daughter? Amaranta, right? I'm pretty sure his daughter's Amaranta. But maybe he has those feelings because of the way that the other daughter looks. I don't know. Tomorrow I'll have the summary and chapter 4 for you all. And I hope you've been enjoying this series.